I gathered proof of a client's incompetence, charged him full price, and secretly rerouted his calls to a competitor. He went under. This incident took place in a southern state. I will refrain from naming it. You'll understand soon enough. I worked as an account manager for a digital marketing firm that offered lead generation services to business proprietors. One of our primary selling points was that if clients activated call tracking numbers and recorded their phone calls, we would guarantee a specified number of leads based on a predetermined expenditure. If we fell short of this commitment, clients would be entitled to a partial, or in extreme cases, a full refund. Essential information regarding advertising. CTN, a call tracking number, is a special number assigned to a specific advertisement for consumers to call. This number appears exclusively on that advertisement and directs calls to the business line. Unless the consumer is particularly attentive, they would not realize they are using a CTN. Call recording. By enabling CTNs, we could record calls and store the audio on our servers. The business must provide consent for this. Additionally, callers would hear a message stating, "This call is recorded for quality assurance." Both elements are necessary for eligibility under our service guarantee. Part 1, setting the scene. The business under discussion was a small contracting firm run by a father and son with a few employees. Their focus was primarily on smaller tasks, such as window installations, drainage work, and finishing. Unfortunately, the owner of this business was exceptionally difficult to work with. His account history was filled with complaints from years past. Additionally, there were strong suspicions of racist tendencies, as his previous account manager was African American. The owner, whom we will refer to as Scott, refused to meet with that manager in person. Conversely, he had no qualms about making time to meet with me, a white person, to express his dissatisfaction with our services. As the contract renewal approached, he claimed we had not generated sufficient leads for him and expressed his intention to file a claim for failing to adhere to our service guarantee. I consulted my manager about the situation, who instructed me to listen to Scott's calls, compile a comprehensive report, and present my conclusions. The manager was concerned that this could escalate to a legal matter over the financial implications involved. After dedicating nearly a week of working hours, I likely invested close to 40 hours into this. I produced a detailed 24-page report analyzing our advertising outcomes. To say I critiqued this business owner's practices would be putting it mildly. The report was an outright indictment of his poor customer service, organizational failures, inability to execute effectively, and a complete disregard for standard business practices that are logically sound. Here are a few examples of the types of calls I reviewed, including several instances where sheer incompetence was evident. Customer example 1. A small-scale landlord with 3 properties had obtained a quote from Scott for work. The landlord accepted the quote and agreed to proceed. In one voicemail, he expressed his willingness to pay a deposit to get started. Across 4 voicemail messages, this unfortunate landlord went from, "I want to pay you," to, "Are you okay?" to, "Why are you not returning my calls?" Indeed, there were multiple voicemails. Scott visited this man's properties, quoted a price, and then simply refused to progress. The reason for this was entirely unclear to me. Afterward, I contacted the customer and introduced myself as an agency conducting a quality assurance survey on Scott's performance. Ultimately, the caller gave his business to Scott's competitor at approximately 15% higher than Scott's quote and was left bewildered by Scott's lack of response. I was equally perplexed. For your information, all my calls were recorded and entered into company records. Customer example 2. This particular case infuriated me. The public housing office reached out to obtain a quote for work on 25 different homes. Scott actually answered the phone this time, ironically, one of the few times he ever picked up. Initially, Scott seemed pleased about landing such a lucrative project. However, Scott subsequently discovered 2 significant details. It was Section 8 housing. The neighborhood predominantly featured Black and Hispanic residents. Upon learning this, Scott abruptly informed the housing office that, unfortunately, he was fully booked, which was untrue, and declared that this area lay outside his service range, also untrue. The housing office was puzzled and asked, "So you're not interested in bidding?" Scott replied, "No, I'm not," and disconnected the call. He didn't even bother to say goodbye. I conducted a follow-up call with the housing office, and the representative was understandably perplexed as to why Scott exhibited zero interest in the job. Thankfully for Scott, the representative did not connect his behavior to any potential discriminatory motives, as that would have constituted a violation of the law. Customer example 3-1 call came from an overseas number in Japan. A service member, who was deployed, contacted Scott late at night during his business hours. The service member explained that over the weekend, someone broke into his home in the States, where Scott operated. He sought to arrange for a new door and emphasized the urgency of the situation, as his wife had to stay in a hotel. Scott never returned his calls, nor did he reach out via email or contact the wife, who was local. This was a simple job that Scott could have completed in about an hour and would have yielded a decent profit. I believe that's enough examples. Part 2 Analysis and Strategy. The ultimate report indicated that out of the X phone calls, Scott failed to properly service leads in roughly 70% of the cases. While I could have continued expanding on this, I felt that a clear trend had been established. It wasn't that our service failed to generate leads for Scott. Rather, Scott himself was a prejudiced individual that everyone found insufferable. Naturally, I conveyed this in more professional language. When I presented the report to my manager, he assessed it and remarked, "Wow, it's 24 pages long." I inquired if it was acceptable, and he smiled, indicating that he had a good grasp of its content. He stated he would review the document and return to me. The following day, he approached me, confirming that he and the VP had examined the report and asked for my recommendations on the course of action. My recommendation: eliminate all discounts, charge Scott the full price for our services, and clearly communicate that our role is to provide leads, while his responsibility is to convert those leads into sales. If he couldn't do that, it was not our concern. Scott had been receiving a 70% discount, and our pricing structure factored in those discounts. My manager voiced concern that Scott would likely cancel, to which I responded, "And is that an issue? If Scott wished to continue as my client, he would have to pay a premium for that privilege. If he was unwilling to do so, I was perfectly content to let him leave." My manager smiled and said, "Nope." Part 3 The meeting. My manager and I scheduled a meeting with Scott. I created a PowerPoint presentation summarizing my findings. About a third of the way through, Scott urged me to get to the main point. Knowing this was likely to be a contentious meeting, I requested my manager be present for both support and as a witness. I explained that our responsibility was to generate leads, while it was his job to convert them into sales. His inability to do so was not our concern. He became agitated, and my manager backed me up. Scott replied, "Fine, I will renew my contract at the same rate," to which I responded, "Actually, you didn't let me finish. We have new pricing for you." Scott inquired. "Lower," I replied. "Oh no, not lower." My manager smirked, and Scott asked for the new rate. I presented him with the full rate, which was 3 times higher than what he had been paying. Scott was enraged, accusing me of overcharging him, claiming I was ripping him off, and labeling me a poor salesperson. He even told my manager that I deserved to be fired for my treatment of him. My manager glanced at me, and I had awaited this moment. Truth be told, I cared not for Scott's opinion of me. My actual goal was to prompt him to cancel. "Scott, you are a difficult client, and as such, the pricing of our service must reflect the challenge of providing it. Therefore, we will charge you our full rate. If you would like, I would be happy to discuss how this investment still makes sense based on our previous performance." This language had been discussed with my management beforehand, and my manager thought it was appropriate. It felt incredibly satisfying to say those words. It was the politest way to communicate, "You are difficult. If I'm going to work with you, it has to be worthwhile for me." Scott labeled us greedy opportunists and declared, "I will cancel." I responded, "That is a possible outcome we have determined is acceptable if that is your choice." Scott huffed and asked, "And what about my refund?" I replied, "Scott, we have clearly demonstrated that we fulfilled our obligations. The reason you are not generating sales is due to your company's failure to close on the leads we provide." Scott retorted, "So you are implying that I don't know what I'm doing?" I responded, "Scott, If you agree to sign at the new rate, I would be happy to assist you free of charge in improving your sales techniques and closing more of your leads. This was the underlying suggestion that he lacked competence in running his business and was intended as an insult. Scott retorted, "No way, I will call my lawyer." I asked, "So I take it you're not going to renew?" He replied, "Absolutely not." My manager stated, "That's fine. Would you like us to send you our report on your leads via email?" Scott responded, "Sure, I will show this to my lawyer." For the record, we never heard from Scott's lawyer. We wished Scott a good day, and he departed. Later, we sent him an email, attached the report, and offered to provide the recordings in question if his lawyer requested that information. We ensured all our bases were covered, and we were confident about it. I suspected he realized the same, but was too prideful to acknowledge it. Part 4, making sure the dagger is deeply planted. A few weeks elapsed, and my manager instructed me to terminate his account. I needed to contact Scott regarding the fate of his CTN numbers, which we controlled. Our contract stipulated that at the conclusion of the agreement, the customer could have the numbers ported over for a fee. It would have been customary to waive that fee as a goodwill gesture. However, since Scott sought zero goodwill, that is exactly what he received. I informed my manager that I would not port the numbers free of charge, and just as he had quoted me, I charged him the full rate of $15 per number. The total came out to just over $100. I called Scott, only to reach his voicemail, as he failed to answer. I also sent him a registered letter outlining that he had 30 days to respond. In that letter, I stated that we had his CTNs, and if he was willing to pay the $15 per number transfer fee, we would facilitate the transfer to his phone provider. One morning, I awoke to a barrage of hateful text messages from Scott, telling me to go to hell. I took this to mean that Scott was uninterested in having his numbers ported, and I reviewed those messages with my manager. We saved those messages and added them to his account. Part 5, however, there's more. I was left with 7 CTN numbers that had been in active use for many years. These 7 numbers were saved in Scott's customers' phones, and for many of them, these numbers were considered Scott's. Although these numbers would not be advertised, that did not prevent them from receiving phone calls. If I simply allowed the numbers to become inactive, customers would call only to be informed that the number was no longer in service. I am not entirely certain of the legality of my actions, but it's been a number of years, and I feel comfortable introducing you to Bobby. Bobby was another Southern gentleman, but while Scott was insufferable, Bobby was a delight. His mother would bake me pies for our meetings, and he was an absolute joy to collaborate with. Bobby owned a business similar to Scott's, but his company was more advanced, offered a broader range of services, and serviced the same area. I submitted a request to transfer all of Scott's 7 CTNs to Bobby's account and waiving the fee. Consequently, hundreds of Scott's customers would believe they were reaching out to Scott, only to be connected with Bobby instead. Bobby redirected all his calls to his secretary, Ashley, who was a gem. Ashley was also a remarkable salesperson, and I was confident she could convert Scott's clients for Bobby. Thus, I arranged for those 7 CTNs to be transferred to Bobby's account. This created several favorable outcomes for nearly everyone involved. Bobby acquired more business. I generated more leads for Bobby, which made Bobby more willing to spend more money with me, ultimately benefiting my earnings. Scott's former customers received superior service. Part 6, reaping my reward. During the next performance meeting with Bobby, he expressed satisfaction over the sudden influx of new customers. He even inquired, "What did you do to my account?" I smiled and responded, "I analyzed your account and made a few adjustments. Have you noticed any improvements?" He certainly had. He followed up by asking, "Did this cost me anything extra?" I replied, "Nope." He ultimately increased his spending with us by approximately 40% on additional services. A year later, I Googled Scott's business and discovered he was no longer in operation. I wonder what happened. No, my company never discovered that I had ported over those numbers. I strongly suspect our legal department would have been displeased. Summary: I demonstrated to my client that I was providing value, refused his request for compensation, significantly increased his fees, redirected his customers to his competitor, and ultimately, he went out of business. Edit: I made minor formatting adjustments and divided the story into smaller sections for better readability, as I recognize this is quite lengthy. Story 2. After being thrown into a hostile work group managed by Jim, I faced relentless demands and massive stress. My mom died, and they showed zero sympathy, pushing me to the brink. I quit, then took medical leave. Now I'm getting paid while enjoying life. My narrative begins quite ordinarily. Much like anyone else's after 5 years at a large corporation, my department underwent a reorganization. This particular restructuring, similar to many others, was a poorly conceived initiative concocted by an executive in a corner office, lacking proper planning, execution, and communication. Regardless, I was transferred from my former team to a completely new team under the management of Jim. At first glance, Jim appeared to be a decent person, possessing a dry sense of humor and a British accent that led me to assume he was rather amiable. Working under Jim was tolerable. He was often unavailable, and during our monthly meetings, he would rattle off a list of tasks for me, then excuse himself to attend another call. I felt somewhat adrift, yet believed I could manage my responsibilities. During my annual phone evaluation, Jim offered cliched praise about my performance, while I could hear him distractedly typing responses to instant messages. When we reached the topic of my salary, he hesitated. I secured you a modest increase. I couldn't negotiate much more. Truthfully, I won't question how salaries are determined, but you earn significantly more than the other members of my team. It was an uncomfortable moment, but not the first time I'd encountered such a direct salary discussion with a male supervisor. This subject has never arisen with the women who have managed me, prompting me to wonder if he would have made similar remarks had I been male. Over the years, while managing teams, I observed a pattern wherein the women on my teams often earned less than their male peers, so I recognize that I am an exception. However, as a high achiever with a continuous 25-year career and no children, I have worked diligently for my compensation and take pride in it. Given my experience, credentials, and certifications, I could easily find employment elsewhere at my current salary. Not long after our evaluation, Jim transitioned to focus on my primary business partner group, leaving me without a direct manager, solely reporting to a supervisor I had never met. That's when everything unraveled. Unbeknownst to me, my salary was mentioned in a discussion with Jim's new team, specifically among the managers of the teams I collaborated with in my partner group. As relayed to me, Jim didn't divulge explicit details, but when one of the women expressed dissatisfaction regarding my work, Jim remarked that he was astonished by the complaints, considering I was the highest-paid individual on his former team. He effectively soured their opinions of me. Reviewing my emails allowed me to pinpoint the exact moment Jim made that comment because the tone of all those managers shifted dramatically. Whenever I posed a question, I faced criticism for, "You're our most senior analyst. You should know that." Documentation that had previously been acceptable was suddenly deemed entirely incorrect. Two particularly hostile individuals emerged: Pat, responsible for the reporting systems we were migrating, and her junior project manager, Wanda. Pat confronted me aggressively, demanding I develop a plan to advance us to the next generation of reporting, which wasn't slated for release until 2021. The preliminary plan that Wanda had drafted resembled notes scrawled on a greasy napkin, so Pat insisted, as I was the subject matter expert, that I complete Wanda's work for her. Pat required a detailed plan from 2019 leading up to the May 2021 release that included all tasks necessary for delivery right from the beginning, which directly contradicts effective planning practices. I cannot predict future events, so my plans generally commence with detailed near-term tasks and progressively broaden to include more generalized tasks that will be developed in greater detail as we move forward. This approach is standard within the industry and had never posed an issue until now. Pat continuously pressured me to finalize this comprehensive plan within 5 days, which would have been a daunting challenge under the best of circumstances. Nevertheless, I created a detailed 2,000-line plan, working late into the evenings and over the weekend, despite suffering from arm pain for several months due to typing at my home office, necessitating frequent breaks to alleviate the discomfort. Note I had been transitioned to remote work against my preference, and following the reorganization, I requested a desk at the office. Jim consistently brushed off my requests, claiming there was no space, prompting me to invest over $1,500 in an ergonomic chair and desk for my home, yet my arms continued to ache whenever I used the keyboard for more than 30 minutes. I had to prioritize Pat's requests over my more immediate, pressing tasks for the upcoming releases in the following months, since she insisted her work took precedence. Without a manager to help realign my priorities, when I expressed that my existing projects needed to be addressed first, Pat bitterly sighed in front of several colleagues, including Wanda, and said, "So you're our most senior SME and you're telling me you can't do the work." Pat escalated matters by insisting I run every element of the plan I was constructing through Wanda, a junior-level PM who not only lacked understanding of our systems, I had to explain to her how to compile her own status reports, but also wrote at an elementary level. Even basic subject-verb agreement escaped Wanda. However, she operated with a superiority complex, believing she could dictate my actions. It felt akin to a small dog attempting to command a large, powerful one. Wanda was undeniably out of her depth, yet every time she made a mistake, she would quickly pass the blame onto me. She would also preemptively throw me under the bus. Her only talent seemed to be deflecting blame and portraying herself as the victim. I was at a loss, experiencing panic attacks. My heart raced to 145 beats per minute while lying on the couch at night, contemplating work. Overwhelmed in pain, then the unimaginable happened. My mother passed away unexpectedly. When I informed the team, not only did they show no sympathy, but they also expressed frustration. I was required to take a week for bereavement, which irritated them further as it coincided with the deadline set by Pat to finish Wanda's plan for the 2021 project. Instead of preparing for the funeral or connecting with my family, I spent the 3 days before my leave working late nights to complete the plan. We met at 5 p.m. on the day prior to my leave, where Pat and Wanda criticized my plan and announced they would collaborate with another team member to correct all my purported errors during my absence. Finally free from Pat and Wanda, I took my leave. During this time, my arm pain subsided significantly. After 6 weeks of physical therapy for my arm issues, simply not typing had proven tremendously beneficial. With only 2 days remaining before my return to the toxic work environment, I dreaded going back. When my heart palpitations returned, I recognized I could not face returning. Initially, I resolved to resign on the day I was scheduled to return. I felt such a strong loathing for them that I didn't want to provide even 2 weeks' notice. Their cruel treatment regarding my bereavement leave fueled my desire to leave them in a bind for their imminent projects, as well as the 2021 plan. If I burned bridges or jeopardized my reputation, I reasoned, so be it. I was approaching an age when many retire or undergo significant career changes, and I no longer needed to maintain that connection. I had saved enough money, and my health took precedence over these toxic individuals or my salary. The night I committed to quitting, I fell asleep feeling relieved and free of anxiety for the first time in half a year, with the weight of working with those individuals lifted from my shoulders. It seemed like a solid plan. The next morning, I awoke with an even better strategy. It satisfied all my criteria. I would not need to return to work. I would not have to furnish 2 weeks' notice, which meant they would still be in disarray. My pay would continue, and I could manage my arms, which had been in pain for an extended period, while also addressing my out-of-control anxiety, all resulting from my unwelcoming coworkers. My revised plan was straightforward: take medical leave. I required protected medical leave via the Family and Medical Leave Act, which, for those unfamiliar with the United States, grants up to 12 weeks of leave where my specific job role and salary must be maintained for my return. Additionally, because it was medical leave, I would be enrolled in short-term disability, allowing my company to pay 100% of my salary for 8 weeks, followed by 65% for the remainder of my time off. The most appealing aspect of this plan is that it effectively harms the people I wish to undermine, and it's entirely legitimate. I had been struggling at work due to numerous medical appointments for my arms, physical therapy, and ongoing therapy for my anxiety, alongside sessions with a psychiatrist. These health challenges were infringing on my work hours, necessitating early mornings, late nights, and weekend work, and undoubtedly aggravating those who believed I made too much money to warrant time off for doctor visits. 6 weeks later, my team obtained a new manager, coincidentally right before I was to return from bereavement. I discreetly logged into work daily to learn his name and even surreptitiously dialed into the conference call where he was introduced to the team. My 2-level manager, whom I had never spoken to, mentioned at the start, "I believe we have everyone on the bridge. This individual won't be here. She's on bereavement." I contacted the administrators responsible for our Family and Medical Leave Act and short-term disability plans to initiate my claim. I obtained the necessary forms and determined which of my multiple doctors needed to complete them. My orthoptist readily approved my 12-week absence, stating that I had been in pain since May and would likely require time to heal. After consulting with her, my physical therapist, and my psychiatrist, I concluded that I would engage in physical therapy for 6 weeks and then enter a program for anxiety and stress management for the remaining 6 weeks before returning, this entirely covered by my insurance. And all at no cost to me, since I had met my out-of-pocket maximum half a year through owing to a hospital visit for a different medical issue. The night before my scheduled return, I grinned while reviewing the 8:00 a.m. calendar invite from Wanda. In her usual illiterate manner, she had inscribed, "It is important all crucial partners makes every effort to attend this call." Like much of Wanda's obnoxious and illiterate statements, it was aimed at me since I had previously mentioned that I might not be able to log on until 9 a.m. on the day I was to return from leave. I opened a new window and typed to my new manager, "Dear Phil, I regret that this is our first introduction, but while I was attending my mother's funeral, an ongoing medical issue resurfaced, and I must take medical leave immediately." I proceeded to explain that I had been hospitalized a couple of months earlier, and there were other matters preventing my return to work. He could acquire details from my prior manager, Jim. It's noteworthy that Jim neglected to pay attention to my emails detailing my medical appointments even after he transitioned out of being my manager, as I was still obligated to inform him about my absences until a new manager was assigned. As workplace circumstances worsened, I grew more candid about the escalating discomfort in my arms from typing, hoping Jim might grasp the gravity of the situation, but he never did. So here I find myself on a beautiful fall Friday morning, receiving 100% of my salary while composing this narrative. Jim expressed dissatisfaction with my salary when I was under his management. I wonder how he feels now, knowing that I'm not working for it currently. Upon my return, I won't be involved in the 2 projects with imminent releases. One will have been completed, while the other is set to launch less than 4 weeks following my return. They're in for a challenge regarding that. I'm curious whether they have realized that the test documents for November remain unsigned. I was due to finalize them, but Pat compelled me to prioritize Wanda's 2021 project over the November tasks, leaving the test documents stagnant on my work desktop, untouched. I will also be coming back with an entitlement to accommodations, which I have now learned I qualify for under the Americans with Disabilities Act. No longer will they impose requirements that I must work from home or and hunch over a table in the break room if I choose to be in the office. I'm collaborating with an occupational therapist to prepare what those accommodations will entail, but the top requests include a height-adjustable desk, 2 large monitors, and a distraction-free workspace. In the meantime, my treatment plans incorporate physical exercise, nature walks, sessions of both regular therapy and physical therapy, along with weekly massages. I have also scheduled long visits to the library to read all the books I have wanted to catch up on, as well as enjoying nice lunches a couple of times each week. Throughout the day, I periodically glance at my watch while strolling the trails with my dog or simply relaxing, and I smile broadly at the thought of Pat, Wanda, and Wanda's impotent project plan for 2021. I wonder what unfortunate individual is now tasked with assisting her in completing it. I might still quit soon after my return, or they could simply terminate me. I would feel indifferent about that outcome. Yet, this way, I will have secured an additional 12 weeks of pay from these individuals, while benefiting from all the free medical and emotional support my insurance has to offer. They say that living well is the best revenge, and I cannot think of a company or group of individuals more deserving of my retribution. Story 3. Me and my girlfriend broke up a month ago over a heated argument. Later, I found out that the guy friend she would go hiking with is dating her. I didn't know if I got cheated on. So, a bit of context here. I, 28 years old, and my ex, 30 years old, met on a dating app, exchanged social media accounts, and talked extensively about our hobbies, the endings of our previous relationships, and some other personal matters. Her background was quite difficult, involving multiple instances of being cheated on. She had it far worse than I did. We dated a few times, and about a month after we started getting to know each other, I realized she wasn't fully present. She asked me to stop pursuing her, but we still went on our planned date just for the sake of it. A week later, I was offered another chance, and we eventually became a couple after 3 months of dating. A month after we got together, she confessed to me that she had a relapse related to her previous relationship, during which she was cheated on. I attempted to comfort her as much as I could, and she managed to get through it relatively quickly. I inquired if her urging me to stop came from a similar relapse, and she confirmed that it did. I began to notice that after her initial relapse, she would become easily irritated by minor issues like poor photography and affectionate nicknames. I would apologize as often as possible, given her past experiences. She would even ask if she was being too hard on me, and I would assure her that it was all right due to what she was enduring as a woman: PMS, hormonal fluctuations, menstruation, along with the stress she faced from her life and work. This became a recurring issue even while we were together. On one of the rare occasions she attempted humor, she remarked that she was the only mature girl I had spoken to. I found this comment unsettling, as it seemed to imply that my previous girlfriend had been immature. During a phone conversation, I expressed my belief that my ex did not deserve such remarks, and mentioned that there were times when she needed to lighten up a bit. She apologized, but afterward, she claimed she would return everything I spent on our dates and would cut off contact with me. I managed to persuade her not to do this, and we continued on, but it became a significant issue in our short relationship. Whenever I tried to express my feelings, she would immediately believe she was a terrible person, which made me feel guilty. I explained that the purpose of feedback was not to belittle us, but to discover how we could improve, as long as the criticism was reasonable. I also encouraged her to be open with me about her feelings, as it would be worse if she kept everything bottled up. Regarding her second relapse, I attempted to ignore it, but it still troubled me. I was not upset about her being angry with me on a weekly basis. Rather, I felt inadequate for her. The first relapse, along with her ensuing mood swings, seemed like her reactions were directed at me. For days, we continued to exchange sweet messages and maintained our regular calls. However, I began to notice that she made jokes about how she was only interested in dating and not dating for marriage. When I asked if she was genuinely certain about us, she replied no. I also inquired when I could visit her again, but she said she had informed her grandmother that we had broken up. She laughed and insisted she was just joking, which made me feel uncomfortable. She also criticized my clothing choices, pointed out habits she found annoying, made comments about my weight, and asked if I could gain weight to reach 70 kilograms. I was at 65 and recovering from gastritis at the time. I made an effort to change those undesirable habits, such as eating quietly, gaining weight to reach 70, improving my photography skills, and so on, so that I would not embarrass her and could match her ideal partner. Additionally, she questioned my sexual orientation due to my clumsiness. I was not particularly offended by any of this. It did make me more self-conscious about my weight, but I brushed it off. During our final month together, I experienced uncalled for silent treatment and ended up in a heated argument that resulted in us breaking up on negative terms. The silent treatment always felt like it belittled those who genuinely cared. Our argument was intense, and that was the last time we communicated. I spent days wondering if I had been inconsiderate or if an apology could have changed anything. More than a month after our breakup, I came across photos of her with a male friend she met on a hike, whom she is now dating. Then it struck me during our last month together, she said she didn't feel like talking and wanted to avoid the feeling of missing me. We had resolved our issues shortly before our breakup and had returned to our usual affectionate exchanges. I was never envious of the friends she made on her hikes. In fact, I was grateful to them for helping her complete the climbs. She had ambitions, and I always supported her. I have moved on from her, but one thing troubling me is the possibility that she may have been unfaithful during our relationship. Of all the people I trusted, I never expected the betrayal to come from someone with her experience. It has also led me to reflect on my own actions. I have been losing sleep over the situation for several nights, pondering how much I compromised to ensure she didn't endure the same hardships she faced before. However, it also made me consider that perhaps I should have valued myself more than I did. In summary, it appears my ex was unfaithful to me with the man she met during one of her hikes. Edit provided a concise backstory. Edit 2 corrected our ages.